Okay, welcome to the channel. This will be the first video, and today we're making a ball mill for black powder. So today, need to make a ball mill and be converting a rock tumbler to do it. So this uses lead balls in a jar here, and by spinning it over, it's able to grind it. This is much safer for this is much safer because using the lead is a non-sparking material. We can't possibly create a spark, but we can still grind chemicals into fine powder. So we need snap ring pliers, something to cut with, a Phillips head screwdriver, and a length of tubing. The important part here is that it is 3/4 inch outside diameter and 1/2 inch inside diameter. So we have here just a ball mill from Amazon, the rock tumbler that's going to become a ball mill. So you can see I modified this once before. This type of tube doesn't actually work all that well, so we're going to try something else, see if it's any better. So we've got to take the motor cover off here, take our end cap off this side, pull this rod out, get a new piece of tubing on it. So the reason why this is important is because a lot of the time we need very fine powders, and they can clump together, especially with humidity from being stored. By putting them in a ball mill, it is a safe way to kind of grind them into a finer powder and make them where we can actually work with them. It also has a mixing effect because as it tumbles over and over again, then it ends up mixing all of the powder with a kind of cascading motion. So there's definitely a couple advantages. One of the big ones is I mostly use this for making black powder with almost everything. So this is especially good for that. Careful with those bull rings. They like to fly. We can punch this little bushing out of here. Get this pull this drive belt off back here. Like that drive belt. Now, this old one has like that braided white, I guess, nylon in it. Yeah, it's really slick. It doesn't really grab at all. So we'll be tossing that, getting rid of it. This is the one that actually come with the rock tumbler initially, and it's actually a little kind of sticky. So what we'll end up doing here, the reason that we need to put a different kind of tubing on here is just because in order to get an optimal tumbling with the ball mill, we need the jar to rotate at about 90 RPM-ish. That will give us any faster, and you're really not going to be getting any benefit. Any slower, and this is actually going to take forever. So, I may need a new blade here. But 90 is the optimal RPM that we want. Well, anyone who knows anything about gear ratios knows that when you have a big gear and a small gear, you can spin faster or slower for the cost or the gain of torque. So what we're doing here, torque doesn't really matter here because it's a friction thing, but by increasing the size of our tubing compared to what the motor already has, we actually get a little bit more RPM out of it. And so it'll get our jar to spin at the speed that we want it to. This is pretty tight fit. And you don't have to have it, but WD-40 can help. I will be spraying the bushings before I put it back into service. That fits on there fairly well. I might savvy that. That actually sticks pretty good. It's not as slick as the other one was. That may work a lot better. Stab our bushing back in there. And it is keyed, so it only fits on one way. Get our snapper. And anyone who doesn't know, that's a bull ring. Also known as a snap ring. So these are bull ring pliers, also known as snap ring pliers. I got this and the tubing at Home Depot. Hashtag not sponsored. They do make better snap ring pliers, but these work. So it can't come out of there. Come back over here, put my little work belt on, and I can see there's a gear on the motor side. So funny enough, this actually only powers the one roller. It doesn't do both sides. Spin that. But yeah, and then make sure that you're seated on the gear correctly, because the last thing you want is this thing to come off. It is very important to make sure it is unplugged. It has a switch in the back. The switch is off. So there's no chance of it, turning on and trying to take your fingers off, which would be a really bad idea. A really bad day. So we can get this belt on here. Seems to be on there pretty good. You can see that fan is not the most stable thing in the world. But it's pretty simple. You got a small electric motor, spins this fan and its output shaft. It's got a belt bringing it over to this roller. And then you've got a really big gear ratio here, because this is probably, hell, I couldn't even guess how big that is. But you're probably talking about like one rotation is like 30 on that small gear. So this thing has a lot of torque to spare, because whenever you size up a gear, you lose your speed. So this has a really high gear ratio. So we've got our snap ring back on there. In all honesty, you probably don't need these caps with that snap ring. The big danger is probably going to be the bushing trying to walk out. And something else worth noting is that, this is pretty oversized for the size of our jar. Well, the reason is this is a dual rock tumbler, so it's made to do 2 jars at once. The reason why that's important here, and make sure you don't lose all your spacers. That's your vent, stops anything from going down in there. But the reason why we want that is because rocks are heavy, but they're nothing compared to lead. So even though it's a rock tumbler, it can handle 2 jars full of rocks. Well, we're going to get the same weight with 1 jar of lead. Basically, it's lead shot. They're musket balls. I got them at Academy, so they're not hard to find. But because of how much heavier it is, we really only want to use 1 of these jars at any given time. And also, it'd be a pretty bad idea to have a jar of oxidizer and a jar of fuel mixing at the same time. That is what we call asking for trouble. So, that's all of our screws back. We've got that gear ratio that we want. So next, we have one of our actual jars. Just nice little, kind of clear. And you don't need any tools really to take these apart. This washer is actually pretty good for opening up the jar. And taking this piece out is the one that is somewhat difficult. This is your part that seals to make sure nothing comes out of the jar. This is actually watertight. So once we have our jar, there's a bunch of like oil and it feels waxy from being brand new. So what we'll do, we'll take a little acetone, which we will actually need for some firework projects, and a paper towel. acetone on here. Close your jar. Never want to leave an open jar of anything flammable laying around. And just rub down the outside of it so that our rollers can get good grab. The inside, because whatever it is, probably like wax from the mold, we don't want contaminating what we make. We don't know what it's made out of, so it could react, so it could be flammable, and both of those would be very bad things. You never want your black powder to, randomly explode. Wipe this down pretty good. Now with my other jar, it is wrapped in that kind of like orange electric tape. That was an attempt to get a little bit more grip out of the roller, because I was having a problem with it spinning, and it just never really seemed to work. It didn't really help much. It really didn't. So, we'll push that down on there real good. Throw your lid on, the washer, and then your little thumb screw. By tightening this down pretty good. That pulls up the diaphragm so that nothing can get out of here. So we're going to leave this open on the side for now so that the acetone can actually dissolve. One of the somewhat important things for a ball mill is, because this is going to be outside, plugged in, on its own, while I'm going to be inside, because it takes like 4 hours. So I am not going to be in here in the shed watching it. And we don't want to. Now, it's probably an overly cautious thought, but if we don't have to be in the room when it goes, we don't want to be. You can see this is covered in black powder, but you've just got little lead musket balls. They're non-sparking, they can't possibly cause a fire, so that is exactly what we want. But every batch of black powder that I make with this, it takes about 4 hours if you've got an optimum ratio. For me, it was taking a little bit longer because it was not spinning at the right RPM. So we actually use this little timer here that I got from Home Depot. 24-hour cycle, you can set it to whatever time it is, and then when you push down these little plungers, each plunger is 30 minutes. So we can count these out, get 4 hours, you plug this into an outlet, and then you plug your ball mill into the side here. And then when they're pulled up, the power's off. When they're pushed down, the power's on. So not only do we not have to be in the room when it's turning off and on, in case there's a spark or something, but also we don't even have to watch it. We can set it, set our timer, and then leave. And it stays out in the shed where you can't hear it spinning. So, in the name of longevity, I've got little WD-40. Spray our little plastic bearings. Try to get them to last longer. You can use really any light oil. I just happen to have WD-40. Wipe off our extra. Don't want that to get an oily mess, and don't really want them on the rollers either. And it says here it does 2-3 pound jars. This is probably like 5. So it goes on there. We plug in our ball mill to our timer. We can set this up for 4 hours. And then, whenever I plug this in, the timer will start running, and when it reaches the end of the timer, it will just turn off, as long as we turn our switch back on. And that is how you set up a ball mill for use, and that's all there is to it. How to convert a rock tumbler into a ball mill for fireworks.